Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our study of the Psalms. Today, we're going to be looking at Psalm number 74. This lesson is going to be an introductory lesson to the Psalm itself. We'll read the verses, but we won't go into any depth in them. I plan on teaching the first 11 verses of this Psalm next week, and the following week, verses 12 through 23. Again, and as always, Lord willing, we'll cover those in the order that I would like to cover them in, unless the Lord changes my mind in some way on that. Now, Psalm 74, much like Psalm 73, is a psalm written by Asaph. And you're going to see some similarities between the psalms in Asaph's writing. One of the first things you'll see is his tendency to over-exaggerate things. Now, some of the Psalms, as we read them, they don't seem like they are Psalms that were written thousands of years ago. They seem like they could have been written just yesterday. And while some of the language may be a little bit different and some of the examples may not be examples that sound like examples we would use today, if you look at the heart of the Psalm, at the core teachings of them, you'll see that, and we'll observe especially in this one, that there are no new problems for mankind under the sun. There are no new issues even for God's people that are new. And the problems that plague mankind, they absolutely never change. They become called by different names, but they are not new. It's the same with God's people, which today is his holy congregation, the church that belongs exclusively to his Son, Jesus Christ. Let's begin by reading the whole of this psalm and make some observations regarding God's people both then and now. Psalm 74, a maskil of Asaph. O God, why have you rejected us forever? Why does your anger smoke against the sheep of your pasture? Remember your congregation, which you have purchased of old, which you have redeemed to be the tribe of your inheritance, and this Mount Zion where you have dwelt. Turn your footsteps toward the perpetual ruins. The enemy has damaged everything within the sanctuary. Your adversaries have roared in the midst of your meeting place. They have set up their own standards for signs. It seems as if one had lifted up his axe in a forest of trees. And now all is carved work they smashed with hatchet and hammers. They have burned your sanctuary to the ground. They have defiled the dwelling place of your name. They said in their heart, let us completely subdue them. They have burned all the meeting places of God in the land. We do not see our signs. There is no longer any prophet, nor is there any among us who knows how long. How long, O God, will the adversary revile and the enemy spurn your name forever? Why do you withdraw your hand, even your right hand? From within your bosom, destroy them. Yet God is my king from of old, who works deeds of deliverance in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. You broke open springs and torrents. You dried up ever-flowing streams. Yours is the day. Yours also is the night. You have prepared the light and the sun. You have established all the boundaries of the earth. You have made summer and winter. Remember this, O Lord, that the enemy has reviled and a foolish people has spurned your name. Do not deliver the soul of your turtle dove to the wild beast. Do not forget the life of your afflicted forever. Consider the covenant, for the dark places of the land are full of the habitations of violence. Let not the oppressed return dishonored. Let the afflicted and needy praise your name. Arise, O God, and plead your own cause. Remember how the foolish man reproaches you all day long. Do not forget the voice of your adversaries, the uproar of those who rise against you, which ascends continually. In the first 11 verses, Asaph tells of the great sorrows and tragedies that have befallen God's people. In verses 12 through 23, we're going to see his arguments as to why God should intervene on behalf of his people, but more so on behalf of his own person, on behalf of his own name. Charles Spurgeon, in his commentary, said of this psalm, "The history of the suffering church is always edifying. When we see how the faithful trusted and wrestled with their God in times of dire distress, we are thereby taught how to behave ourselves under similar circumstances. We learn, moreover, that when fiery trial befalls us, no strange thing happened unto us. We are following the trail of the host of God." And what a true statement that is. Even though he uses the word church in his statement regarding this, and a term not known in the Old Testament, the word that we have as church in our Bibles, ekklesia in the Greek, is simply a word that means the host of God's people. And the host of God's people has always existed. Something interesting about this psalm, as it cries out to God, and as it cries out to God for help from his enemies, it never once mentions any national sin of Israel, nor does it mention any individual sin of any person in Israel. And what's so interesting about this, I think, is that there is always the sin of the people as a reason that got the people into the mess that they were in, either as a nation or as individuals. It's always the reason that gets people into trouble. And it's no different even today, either in regards of the whole body of Christ or as individual members. Let's have a look at an example real quick of what led to Israel's downfall and what leads to our own downfall. I'm going to read the entire chapter of Deuteronomy 8. It's just so good. It paints just a wonderful picture of how Israel got into the mess that they found themselves in. Deuteronomy 8, the Lord speaking, "All the commandments that I am commanding you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to give to your forefathers. You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He humbled you and let you be hungry, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand that a man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. Your clothing did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Thus you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you, just as a man disciplines his son. Therefore you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs, flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat food without scarcity, in which you will not lack anything, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I am commanding you today. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied, and have built good houses and lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold multiply, and all that you have multiplies, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water. He brought water for you out of the rock of flint. In the wilderness he fed you manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might test you to do good for you in the end. Otherwise you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers as it is this day. It shall come about, if you ever forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that you will surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so you shall perish, because you would not listen to the voice of the Lord your God. Everything that God commanded of Israel, they ultimately either neglected or they made a mockery of. They neglected some commands of God by simply ignoring certain commands, just not doing them, pretending that they didn't even exist. They made a mockery of other commands of God, like fasting and making blood sacrifices. They made mockeries of those commandments of God by doing them, but in the midst of following these commandments, they did not love or care for God, and they did not love and care for their fellow man. The two greatest commandments upon which the whole law was founded upon, proper treatment of God and respect towards God, obedience towards God, and proper respect and care for other people, they completely neglected. Now, some think, in reading about God's harsh judgments of Israel in the Old Testament, some think that God was too harsh. These same criticizers pay no mind to the over 100 years of warnings that God issued to Israel through a whole multitude of prophets, practically begging the nation to turn away from their disobedience, to turn away from the false gods that they had turned to, begging them to come back. It was only after over 100 years of warnings that God finally stopped the warnings and issued his discipline to his people. Neither God's people of old nor God's people today ever face hardships that are unjust. Now, I know that's a big statement. I know it's a hard statement to hear sometimes, so hear me out on that. Because we think that we do face things that are not fair. We think that we do face things that are unjust. And some people, even in churches, teach that it is so. But I tell you, church, that such teaching is a poison to the church. It's a poison to God's people. To believe that God is not teaching and training you through the difficult things that you live through. Now consider this. When do you grow? When do you grow as a person? When do you grow in your faith? In easy times or in hard times? When is your faith strengthened as a follower of God? Is your faith strengthened when everything goes your way or when you face trials? The answers are obvious, aren't they? It's the difficulty. It is the trials of life. It is the suffering where we join in Christ even in, or like him even in his suffering, that we grow and that we cry out to God more, and that we become more dependent upon him, and that we become more thankful to him for the way that he has blessed us, for the promises, the future promises that he has made that are going to come to be someday. Now, it is a wrong interpretation of the events of your life to say something along the lines of, God is punishing me, or God is punishing his people. Why is it wrong? Why is that a wrong statement? Here's why. Because God does not punish his children. God disciplines his children. Now, some person would say, well, Wes, you're just, those are two words that basically mean the same thing. No, they're not. They don't mean the same thing at all. Discipline is training. God trains his children in similar ways as we train our own. If you asked my children in the midst of their discipline to tell you about me as their father, they would likely tell you that I am some form of a tyrant. And they may even accuse me of not caring about them whatsoever. How much are we just like little children, not understanding the meaning of our discipline, not understanding the love that is behind our discipline, not seeing the greatness that can be produced through suffering for a time. We're just like little children in that regard. Themes throughout Psalm 74 mirror our current situation in human history. Just a few examples. The first 8 verses, I'll throw a few examples out there. Verse 1, we look at our current situation in the world, and we too feel rejected by God at times. If not as individuals, we certainly feel that way as a nation. In verse 2, we also pray that God will remember his people. In verse 3, we also tell God what the enemy is tearing up amongst us. In verse 4, we also complain about those who are destroying the congregation of God's people from the inside out. In verse 7, we also see God's name being dragged through the mud, and we complain to him about that. In verse 8, we also complain about those who seek to destroy God's message and destroy his work on this earth through the passing of laws, through calling things truth that are not truth, by calling the words of God hate speech instead of love speech that it actually is. We complain about those things to the Lord, just like Asaph is complaining to the Lord in this psalm. And it goes on and on through the rest of the psalm. And we're going to look at those verses, and we're going to learn from those, and we're going to be encouraged by those. And let me tell you, church, even though some of this sounds doom and gloom, it will not be a doom and gloom study. It will end, as all things end for God's people, in joy. In Romans 11, verse 1, the Apostle Paul says, I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? Now, that's a question that people have been asking since the beginning of time, all the way up through today. Has God rejected his people? And looking at the world around us, sometimes it may be tempting to say, it appears that he may be rejecting his people. But that's not true, and that is never the case. He indeed has not. Don't be like the rest of the world and get caught up in the small picture, the microcosm of what you see going on in human history around you. Instead, be rest assured in the big picture. In the big picture, God prevails. Good wins in the end. And no matter how much it appears we lose in this life, we will win in the end because of Christ. As a matter of fact, not only will we win in the end, but everyone who belongs to Christ has won already. The battle has already come to a close for those of us who belong to Christ. We are just waiting for the day when all the troubles and hardships and things that we see in this world that are not right will all be made right by the Lord himself. And we look forward to that day. Until next time, church, love God and love others. I'm Wes LaFleur, signing off.